When I was taken into emergency surgery, not a single member of my family showed up at the hospital. They chose my sister's graduation dinner over the possibility that I might never wake up. I learned that before I even learned whether the operation had worked. The recovery room was quiet except for the slow, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor beside me. Every breath scraped against the bandages wrapped tightly around my abdomen. The fluorescent lights above me blurred into pale halos, and the smell of antiseptic settled heavily in the air. A nurse noticed my eyes opening and smiled, with the kind of relief usually reserved for people who had almost slipped away. "You made it," she whispered. Those were the first words anyone said to me after the surgery. Not "we're here," not "your family's waiting." Just those two words. My phone rested on the small table beside the bed. The screen came alive the moment I reached for it with trembling fingers. "Mom, call us, it's urgent." Beneath the message sat 94 missed calls. For one impossible second, I thought they had finally realized what they'd done. Maybe someone had raced to the hospital too late. Maybe guilt had finally outrun convenience. Then the nurse quietly asked if I wanted her to call my emergency contact. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because she didn't know they had already made their choice. A choice between a hospital operating room and a restaurant decorated with balloons, flowers, and congratulatory banners. They chose applause over uncertainty, champagne over stitches, family photos over saying goodbye. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last memory before anesthesia swallowed me whole. The surgeon had squeezed my shoulder and said, "We'll take good care of you." Behind him, through the swinging emergency doors, I had searched for familiar faces. No mother, no father, no brother, nobody. Just empty hallway chairs reflecting the harsh white lights. I had gone into surgery believing my family was racing through traffic to reach me. Instead, they were posing for pictures while waiters carried dessert to the table. As the pain medication slowly dulled the ache in my body, something else became perfectly clear. The surgery had saved my life. But while I was unconscious, something much more important had died. Whatever loyalty I still believed existed between us never made it out of that operating room. My name is Ethan, and for 32 years I had mistaken being dependable for being loved. I was the son everyone called when something broke, the brother who left work early to solve other people's emergencies, and the quiet presence who kept family traditions alive without ever becoming the center of them. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing that my importance always depended on what I could do for everyone else. My younger sister Lily was different. She had a way of filling every room before she even walked into it. Every achievement she reached became a family celebration, while mine were acknowledged, with polite smiles before the conversation, drifted back to her next milestone. I never blamed her for it. Favoritism isn't always created by the favorite. Our parents insisted they loved us equally, but love has a habit of revealing itself through priorities instead of promises. I was expected to understand every disappointment, because I was the mature one. Whenever birthdays overlapped, holidays became complicated, or someone needed to sacrifice. I already knew whose plans would change. I told myself that being reliable was its own reward. I convinced myself that loyalty didn't need recognition. Looking back, those lies were easier to believe than admitting. I had become the family's safety net, strong enough to carry everyone else's weight, invisible enough that nobody noticed when I started collapsing under my own. The surgery wasn't the first time they chose someone else over me. It was simply the first time their decision came with the possibility that I wouldn't be alive to forgive them. The warning signs had never arrived as dramatic betrayals. They came disguised as ordinary moments that only looked important after I lined them up beside each other. If my mother called while I was at work, it was rarely to ask how I was doing. It was because Dad needed help with the taxes. Lily's car wouldn't start, or someone had forgotten to pick up groceries. My name had quietly become another word for available. At family dinners, conversations had a familiar rhythm. When I spoke, there would be a polite pause, a distracted nod, and then someone's eyes would drift toward Lily as if waiting for the real story to begin. She never encouraged it, but she never interrupted it either. Even photographs told the truth no one wanted to say aloud. I was usually standing at the edge of the frame, half a step behind everyone else, smiling just enough to make the picture look complete. Looking back through those albums, I realized I had spent years documenting a family that had already begun editing me out. The week before my surgery, I mentioned the doctor's concerns over dinner. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth before he simply asked whether I had good insurance. My mother reached across the table, not for my hand, but for the breadbasket. Lily apologized for checking her phone because classmates were planning the graduation celebration. No one asked if I was scared. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was practiced. For the first time, I stopped trying to fill it. I watched them laugh about restaurant reservations, seating charts, and graduation speeches while the envelope containing my hospital paperwork rested unopened beside my plate. It remained there until dessert, untouched, like an invitation no one intended to accept. That was the night I understood something I should have recognized years earlier. People don't always tell you where you stand. Sometimes they simply keep setting the table without saving you a seat. 3 days after the surgery, the doctor cleared me to leave the hospital. I walked out carrying a small overnight bag and a folder full of discharge papers. No one was waiting by the entrance. No familiar car pulled into the pickup lane. The only person who wished me well was the elderly volunteer who held the automatic door open and smiled as if I mattered. My phone buzzed again before the taxi arrived. "Mother, please call us. We really need to talk." Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Are you home safely?" Just another request. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the family group chat. The graduation photos were still there. Crystal glasses raised in celebration, wide smiles under warm restaurant lights. My sister holding her diploma while my parents stood proudly beside her. Every picture carried the same timestamp that matched the hours I had been lying unconscious in an operating room. That was all the proof I needed. No confrontation could make those photographs disappear. No apology could change the order of their priorities. Sitting alone in the back of the taxi, I quietly made the only decision that still belonged to me. I stopped asking whether I was important to them. I accepted that I wasn't. By the time I reached my apartment, I had blocked every family number, removed myself from the group chat, changed my emergency contact to my closest friend, and updated my will and medical records. None of it was done in anger. Every click was calm, deliberate, and strangely peaceful. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to begin with punishment. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop, giving people unlimited access to a life they never truly valued. The following Monday, I returned to work with a slower step and a clearer mind. I was a senior financial analyst, a profession that had taught me one lesson better than any therapist ever could. Numbers never cared about excuses. They only revealed patterns. So I treated my family the same way I treated a balance sheet. I gathered facts instead of emotions. Over the next few weeks, I reviewed every account, document, and obligation that connected my life to theirs. I canceled the joint credit card my father occasionally used just until payday. I removed myself as guarantor on a small family loan that had long since become my responsibility. My attorney helped me revise my will, medical directives, and power of attorney, replacing family members with the friend who had quietly visited me in the hospital without being asked. At work, an opportunity arrived almost unnoticed, a promotion that required relocating to another city. Months earlier, I would have declined without hesitation because my parents depended on me for everything from paperwork to home repairs. This time I signed the acceptance letter before lunch. I didn't announce my decision. I didn't post about it online or invite anyone to debate it. I arranged movers, transferred utilities, and changed my mailing address with the same quiet efficiency. I used to prepare quarterly reports. Every task felt less like revenge, and more like reclaiming something that had been loaned out for far too long. By the time my family realized I was leaving, there would be nothing left to argue over. Only completed paperwork, only closed accounts, only the unmistakable silence that follows when someone you've taken for granted finally decides their life no longer requires your permission. 6 weeks after I moved, I finally turned my phone back on. The messages arrived in waves. First came confusion, then irritation, then carefully worded concern. Finally, the truth began to slip through the cracks. My father wanted help refinancing the family home because my income had strengthened their application in the past. My mother needed someone to coordinate her upcoming surgery since I had always handled appointments and insurance forms. Lily's messages were the shortest. She simply wrote, "I didn't realize how much you did until you were gone." I read every message exactly once, then I set the phone face down. A few days later, an envelope arrived at my new apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother asking if we could put everything behind us. She described the graduation dinner as an unfortunate misunderstanding, as though my empty hospital room and their crowded restaurant table had merely been 2 appointments that accidentally overlapped. There was no mention of the photographs, No acknowledgement that I had awakened alone. No apology for choosing celebration over uncertainty. Only a request for things to return to normal. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope, and filed it away with my hospital discharge papers. They belonged together. One documented the day surgeons repaired my body. The other documented the day my family confirmed what had truly been broken. I never sent a reply. Months passed, and the silence accomplished what arguments never could. They learned to solve their own problems. They found other people to call when something needed fixing. Every inconvenience they faced was one I had quietly carried for years without complaint. There was no dramatic confrontation, no speech, no final victory lap, just a life that kept moving forward, without asking permission from people who had mistaken my loyalty for permanence. In the end, my absence became the answer they had refused to hear, when my presence was still freely given. The consequences arrived slowly, the way most real consequences do. A mutual family friend called one evening and, without realizing it, filled in the gaps. My parents were frustrated that I had become distant. My father complained that nobody handled paperwork the way I used to. Holiday gatherings had become strangely disorganized. Tasks that once disappeared quietly into my schedule now remained visible because someone else had to do them. For the first time, my absence had shape, not because they missed my company, at least not at first, because they finally noticed the weight I had been carrying. Lily reached out twice more. Her messages sounded different now, less defensive, more honest. She admitted that she had spent years benefiting from a system she never questioned. Whether that realization came from guilt or maturity, I couldn't say. As for me, the biggest change wasn't external. It was internal. I no longer measured my worth by how useful I was to other people. That habit had taken decades to build and months to dismantle. The strange thing about being taken for granted is that it can convince you that your value exists only in service to others. Once that belief breaks, the world looks different. Relationships become choices instead of obligations. Respect becomes a requirement instead of a reward. That's why this story matters. Not because a family fell apart. Families do that every day. It matters because there are people who spend years earning a place they should never have had to earn in the first place. People who confuse sacrifice with love and silence with peace. And sometimes the most important thing they can do is leave the empty chair exactly where it is, and allow everyone, including themselves, to notice who should have been sitting there. A year later, I drove past the hospital without slowing down. The building was exactly the same. Glass doors opening and closing. Ambulances arriving. Nurses hurrying through another ordinary day. Yet it no longer felt like the place where my family abandoned me. It had become the place where I was given a second chance. Not just to live differently. The promotion had become a new career. My apartment had slowly turned into a home, filled with people who never made me wonder where I stood. We celebrated birthdays because everyone mattered, not because one person always deserved the spotlight. When someone asked how I was doing, they waited for the answer. That simple act still surprised me. Lily and I exchanged occasional letters. They weren't attempts to erase the past. They were small, careful steps toward understanding it. As for my parents, I wished them no harm. I simply accepted that forgiveness and access were not the same thing. I could let go of resentment without reopening the door they had walked away from. That realization brought a peace I had spent years searching for in all the wrong places. People often imagine revenge as something loud, a dramatic speech, a public humiliation, a final score settled in front of an audience. Mine was quieter. I built a life so full that the people who once overlooked me could only watch it from a distance. The greatest victory wasn't that they finally understood my value. It was that I no longer needed them to. Sometimes surviving is the miracle. Sometimes walking away is the courage. And sometimes the most powerful, revenge is becoming so at peace with your own worth that the people who fail to see it become nothing more than a chapter you no longer feel compelled to reread.